Most men do not collapse. In a single moment, they erode slowly, a little more compromise each year, a little more distraction, a little less silence. They wake one morning and realize they no longer recognize the man carrying their name. In ancient Japan, the samurai understood something most modern men never learn. The human spirit does not break because life is hard. It breaks because the mind becomes soft, long before the body surrenders. There is an old Japanese principle called gamen. It means to endure the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. Gamen was not merely survival, it was spiritual discipline. The ability to remain composed while the world stripped comfort away from you. The ability to stand firm without demanding sympathy from others. Miyamoto Musashi wrote that true strategy is developed in adversity, not in peace, not in convenience. A man discovers his real nature only when life removes his illusions. And this is why so many men fear hardship, because hardship introduces them to themselves. There was a man named Kenji who understood this too late. At 37 years old, his life looked respectable from the outside. He worked in a large company in Tokyo, wore expensive watches, answered emails late into the night, and spoke constantly about goals he never pursued. People considered him successful because he appeared busy, but internally his life had become hollow. He could no longer sit alone in silence for even 5 minutes without reaching for noise. Every morning began the same way. He woke already exhausted. His phone became the first thing he touched. News, messages, notifications, endless information flooding into his mind before sunrise. By the time he arrived at work, he already felt defeated, though the day had barely begun. What frightened him most was not failure. It was emptiness. When conversation stopped, when distractions disappeared, when he faced himself directly, he sensed something weak inside him. A restlessness he could not control. A dependence on comfort he could no longer hide. One winter evening after another 12-hour workday, Kenji missed the last train home. Snow drifted slowly through the empty streets while the city lights reflected off wet pavement. For the first time in years, he walked without headphones, without music, without distraction. Just silence. As he passed a small temple hidden between concrete buildings, he noticed an old monk sweeping snow from the entrance path. The monk moved slowly, deliberately, without irritation. Snow continued falling as he swept, covering the stones again almost immediately. Yet the old man showed no frustration, no hurry, no anger toward the futility of the task. Kenji stopped and watched him. Finally, he asked, "Why continue sweeping if the snow keeps returning?" The monk rested the broom against his shoulder and looked at him calmly. "Because the path must still be cleared." That answer followed Kenji home like a shadow. Chapter 1. The weakness modern men protect. Most men today believe comfort is a reward. The samurai believed comfort was a test because comfort has a hidden cost. It weakens discipline while convincing you that weakness is normal. The ancient warriors of Japan trained themselves not merely to fight enemies, but to master dependence. They understood that attachment creates suffering. A man attached to ease becomes fragile. A man attached to praise becomes controllable. A man attached to pleasure becomes weak in spirit. Bushido demanded something harsher: simplicity, restraint, presence. The samurai ate modestly, trained relentlessly, and learned to remain calm under pressure, because they understood that the body follows the condition of the mind. Kenji began noticing his own dependence everywhere. He could not eat without watching something. He could not walk without checking his phone. He could not endure boredom, silence, discomfort, uncertainty, or stillness. Every empty moment had to be filled immediately. Not because he enjoyed stimulation, but because he feared what silence might reveal. And this is the hidden suffering of modern life. Men are drowning in comfort while starving spiritually. The monk's words returned to him repeatedly. The path must still be cleared. Not once, not when convenient, every day. So Kenji returned to the temple. At first, he only stood quietly near the entrance. The monk rarely spoke. Sometimes hours passed in silence while snow drifted through the courtyard and wind moved through bamboo trees nearby. Yet strangely, those silent visits began changing something inside him. For the first time in years, his mind slowed down enough to hear itself. Chapter 2, The Discipline of Silent Endurance. The old monk eventually explained Gaiman more deeply. To endure is not to suffer meaninglessly, he said. It is to remain whole while suffering. Most people misunderstand endurance. They imagine suppression. But the Japanese understanding was different. Gamen was not emotional numbness. It was composure, the refusal to let hardship deform your character. This was why samurai practiced calmness even in ordinary tasks, pouring tea carefully, walking attentively, cleaning armor methodically. Presence during small actions created steadiness during chaos. The monk gave Kenji a simple instruction. For 30 days, wake before sunrise. Sit in silence for 1 hour. No music, no phone, no distractions. Kenji almost laughed. 1 hour sounded easy. It was not. The first morning felt unbearable. Within minutes, his thoughts became violent. Anxiety surfaced immediately. Regret, restlessness, memories, imagined futures. His mind moved like a trapped animal searching desperately for escape. By the third day, he wanted to quit entirely. He realized he had spent years avoiding stillness because stillness exposed him. Silence revealed how fragmented he had become. He had built his identity around stimulation because he no longer possessed internal stability. But each morning he continued sitting, not because he enjoyed it, because the path must still be cleared. This is where transformation truly begins. Not in motivation, not in excitement, but in repetition without emotional dependence. Musashi wrote that discipline is developed through consistent practice beyond mood. The samurai did not ask whether they felt ready. They trained regardless. Modern men wait for emotional certainty before taking action. Warriors act before certainty arrives. And slowly, Kenji's mind began changing. Not dramatically, quietly. His reactions softened. His speech became slower. He stopped interrupting people constantly. He noticed how often others spoke, simply to avoid silence. He noticed how desperate most people were to appear important. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to prove himself. Chapter 3. The man who learns to carry weight. Spring arrived slowly in Tokyo. One morning, the monk handed Kenji 2 heavy buckets filled with water and instructed him to carry them uphill toward the temple garden. The path was steep and uneven. His shoulders burned almost immediately. Water spilled with every careless movement. Several times he nearly dropped the buckets entirely. Finally exhausted, he asked, "What does this have to do with inner discipline?" The monk answered, "You cannot carry water carelessly. You cannot carry life carelessly either." The lesson was simple but brutal. Most suffering comes from resistance. Men exhaust themselves fighting reality instead of strengthening themselves to carry it properly. They demand easier burdens instead of stronger backs. The samurai accepted hardship as inevitable, not because they enjoyed pain, but because resistance to unavoidable difficulty creates deeper suffering. This is why Zen teachings emphasize direct acceptance of the present moment. Kenji began applying this everywhere. He stopped complaining internally about small inconveniences, long lines, delays, fatigue, bad weather. Instead, he practiced remaining calm inside discomfort, not forcing positivity, not pretending to enjoy hardship, simply refusing to become emotionally chaotic because life was imperfect. This sounds small, but it changes a man completely. Because every moment of irritation weakens self-mastery. Most men are defeated by tiny discomforts, long before major hardship ever arrives. The Japanese understood this deeply. Through practices like shugyo, austere training, they deliberately exposed themselves to challenge in order to sharpen the spirit. Cold mornings, long walks, repetition, silence, simplicity, not punishment, preparation. Because a man who cannot govern himself during ordinary discomfort will collapse during genuine adversity. Chapter 4: The Death of the False Self. Months passed. Kenji's co-workers noticed he had changed. He no longer participated in office gossip. He stopped speaking excessively during meetings. He worked carefully, then went home quietly. Some assumed he had become cold. Others thought he was depressed. But internally, something else was happening. For the first time, he felt stable. Not happy in the shallow modern sense, not constantly entertained, but grounded, present, clear. One evening after work, he sat beside the monk beneath a tree while rain tapped softly against temple stones. "How do you know if you're becoming stronger?" Kenji asked. The monk closed his eyes briefly before answering, "When fewer things disturb your spirit." That sentence remained with him permanently. Strength is not loudness. It is not aggression. It is not domination. True strength is emotional steadiness, the ability to remain calm while others become consumed by fear, anger, ego, or chaos. This was the deeper purpose of Bushido. The samurai cultivated inner order because external life is unpredictable. A man without internal discipline becomes controlled by circumstances. A disciplined man remains centered even while life changes around him. Modern culture teaches the opposite. It teaches emotional indulgence, constant expression, endless reaction. But reaction is not power. Reaction is dependency. The samurai sought freedom through self-mastery. And self-mastery requires the death of the false self. The version of you addicted to validation. The version addicted to distraction. The version terrified of silence. The version that collapses whenever comfort disappears. That self must die quietly. Chapter 5: The Quiet Transformation. 1 year after missing the last train home, Kenji walked once more through the temple courtyard during snowfall. Again, the old monk swept snow from the stone path. But this time Kenji understood. The snow would always return. Life would always bring difficulty, fatigue, loss, uncertainty, aging, loneliness, failure. No amount of success could remove suffering from existence. The purpose was never to eliminate hardship. The purpose was to become the kind of man hardship could not destroy. This is the heart of Gaman. Endure with dignity, not bitterness, not self-pity, not theatrical suffering. Quiet endurance, steady action, calm presence. The strongest men in history were rarely the loudest. They were the men who remained composed while others panicked. The men who continued moving carefully through difficulty without demanding applause for their pain. This is why ancient Japanese wisdom still matters today. Because modern life has made men emotionally fragile while convincing them they are free. But freedom does not come from unlimited comfort. Freedom comes from independence from comfort. A man who requires little becomes difficult to control. A man who can endure loneliness becomes difficult to manipulate. A man who can sit quietly with his own mind becomes dangerous in the deepest sense. Not dangerous to others, dangerous to illusion, dangerous to weakness, dangerous to the fears that once ruled him. Kenji eventually stopped visiting the temple every day. He no longer needed constant guidance because the principles had become part of him. The path was no longer something external he walked toward. It existed inside him now. Years later, during another difficult season of life, he remembered the monks sweeping snow in silence beneath the winter sky. And again he understood. The path must still be cleared, even when nobody notices, even when exhaustion arrives, even when progress feels invisible. Because discipline is not an event. It is a way of existing. The ancient samurai knew this. Endurance was not merely survival, it was refinement through suffering, a quiet forging of the spirit. And perhaps this is what modern men have forgotten. Not how to win, but how to endure. To endure boredom without escaping. To endure uncertainty without collapsing. To endure silence without fear. To endure hardship without surrendering dignity. The world will always test you. Comfort will always tempt you toward weakness. Distraction will always pull your attention away from yourself. But if you learn the ancient art of quiet endurance, something extraordinary begins happening inside you. Life stops controlling your spirit. And when that happens, even suffering loses its power to break you.